A millionaire CEO collapsed behind the wheel, only to be saved in the most shocking way by a 7-year-old girl who took control of his car. The night air carried the hum of the city, a steady rhythm of traffic and neon lights bouncing off the glass towers. 7-year-old Lily Peterson walked along the sidewalk with her small backpack swinging against her shoulder, her blonde hair catching bits of light from the street lamps. She was used to being careful, used to hurrying home before it got too dark, but tonight something unusual stopped her in her tracks. From across the street came a sharp, constant sound, the long unbroken note of a car horn pressed down without pause. It wasn't the kind of quick honk she had heard before, this one dragged on endlessly, cutting through the noise of the city like a warning. Curiosity and fear battled inside her, but curiosity won. She crossed the street cautiously, her sneakers tapping against the pavement as she drew closer to the car parked crookedly near the curb. The windows were fogged slightly, and the headlights cast a pale glow onto the asphalt. She thought for a moment that maybe someone had leaned on the horn as a prank, or that the car had broken down, but when she peered inside, her breath caught in her throat. A man in a light blue suit sat behind the wheel, his broad shoulders slumped, his head resting heavily against the steering wheel. The horn screamed because his weight pressed down on it, his body limp, his eyes closed. For an instant Lily froze, her small fists tightening around the straps of her backpack, her heart hammering in her chest. She was just a child, too small to know what to do, too young to understand why her instincts screamed that this man needed help immediately. She stood there on the curb, debating whether to run and find an adult or shout for someone nearby, but the street around her was strangely empty, the few passing cars speeding by without slowing. The man didn't stir, didn't lift his head, and she realized that if she wasted time looking for help, it might already be too late for him. Her pulse quickened, fear prickling up her spine, but there was also a strange determination rising inside her, the kind of instinct that told her she couldn't simply walk away. Lily stepped closer, reaching for the handle of the car door with a trembling hand. The sound of the horn roared in her ears, so loud it made her wince, but she pressed on, pulling at the handle. To her surprise, the door gave way easily, swinging open as if inviting her inside. The smell of cologne and leather filled her nose, mixed with something sharp, something that didn't belong. She looked at the man again, taking in the details she had barely noticed before, his dark brown hair matted slightly at the forehead, his skin pale under the glow of the dashboard lights, the slight twitch of his fingers that made her believe he was still alive, though slipping further with each passing second. Her breath came faster as she realized the enormity of the moment. She was just a little girl, standing alone in the middle of the city at night, staring at a man she didn't know but who clearly needed her help. Fear told her to run, but something stronger kept her rooted to the spot, whispering that she had to act, that this was her responsibility now. She tightened her grip on the door, her small frame silhouetted by the lights of the passing traffic, and took a hesitant step forward. The weight of what she was about to do settled heavily on her, but beneath the fear there was a spark of courage she never knew she had. Lily's pulse quickened as she climbed onto the edge of the car's seat, her small hands gripping the steering wheel that still blared its endless cry. The sound was deafening now that she was inside, but it was not the horn that frightened her most, it was the man slumped beside her, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, his chest rising only in shallow movements that barely reassured her he was still breathing. His face, illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard, looked sharp and strong, but in that moment there was a fragility to him that unsettled her. He looked like someone important, someone who belonged in tall buildings and polished suits, not like a helpless figure trapped in a silent struggle. For a few long seconds she didn't know what to do. Her father had shown her once, in a quiet parking lot, how the pedals worked and how to turn the key, but that was a memory wrapped in laughter and safety, not in fear and desperation. She glanced at the man again and whispered, almost pleading, "Please, wake up." There was no response. The horn droned on, steady and merciless, and the reality of the moment pressed down on her small shoulders. If she waited, no one might come. If she ran for help, he might not last until she returned. A thought formed with terrifying clarity: she was the only one here who could do anything at all. Her tiny hands reached out, trembling, and pushed at his shoulder. He shifted slightly, his weight heavy, his body unyielding. She pushed harder, grunting with the effort, and managed to slide him enough toward the passenger seat that the pressure on the horn released. The sudden silence was so startling that it rang louder in her ears than the noise had, but relief didn't last. The man remained unconscious, his head lolling weakly to the side, and she realized she had only taken the first step. Her heart pounded as she slid fully into the driver's seat, her feet barely reaching the pedals, the steering wheel much too large for her small arms, yet somehow it felt inevitable. She looked through the windshield at the world outside, the wide street stretching ahead, the lights of the city glowing like distant stars, the faint outline of the hospital sign several blocks away that she had seen before on family walks. It felt impossibly far, yet she clung to the thought that if she could only get there, someone stronger, someone who knew what to do, would take over. Her hand trembled as she turned the key, still resting in the ignition, and the car roared awake. The sound filled her chest with both dread and determination. She pressed the brake carefully, recalling her father's words about control, about steady hands, and when she shifted into drive, she felt a jolt of courage flicker in her veins. The car lurched forward awkwardly, her foot pressing too hard at first before she corrected it, her body thrown slightly back against the seat. She gripped the wheel with both hands, her knuckles white, eyes wide as she guided the heavy machine onto the road. Every passing second felt like forever. Headlights from other cars flashed angrily, horns blared behind her, and more than once she swerved too far before pulling the car back on course. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away fiercely, refusing to let herself give in to fear. She whispered over and over, as much to herself as to the man beside her, "Hold on, please hold on, we're almost there." Beside her, the man groaned faintly, a sound so weak she wasn't sure she had imagined it. That tiny sign of life became her anchor, pushing her forward with renewed determination. She adjusted her grip on the wheel, straightened the car the best she could, and kept her gaze locked on the faint glow of the hospital sign in the distance. Every block conquered was a victory, every red light ignored a risk she was willing to take, because time mattered more than rules. And though fear clawed at her from every side, deep inside her something stronger burned, a courage far too big for such a small girl, the kind of bravery that rises only when someone else's life hangs in the balance. The car rattled as it rolled down the avenue, its weight shifting awkwardly under Lily's unsure hands. She leaned forward in the seat, her small frame almost swallowed by the steering wheel, her blue eyes wide and fixed on the glowing hospital sign that shimmered faintly in the distance like a beacon. The city around her seemed louder than ever, the screech of tires from passing cars, the blast of horns from impatient drivers who couldn't comprehend that a child was guiding this vehicle through the chaos of traffic. Fear clawed at her chest, urging her to stop, to run, to abandon the impossible task, but another voice inside her, faint yet unyielding, whispered that she had already gone too far to turn back. The man beside her stirred faintly, a low groan escaping his lips, and that sound alone convinced her she had to keep going. Her small foot trembled on the accelerator, pressing too lightly at times and too hard at others, causing the car to jolt forward and slow unpredictably. She winced every time the tires screeched against the pavement, afraid she might draw more attention than she could handle, but the hospital lights felt closer with every block. She remembered sitting in the back seat of her father's car, listening as he explained which pedal was for stopping and which was for going. At the time it had seemed like a game, a secret knowledge she might never use, but now those memories played like instructions in her mind, guiding her through the terror of the moment. Sweat gathered on her palms and made the steering wheel slick beneath her grip. She wiped one hand quickly against her dress, her knuckles tightening again on the wheel as she swerved narrowly away from a delivery truck that roared past with a blast of its horn. The driver's angry face flashed for an instant, but Lily didn't care. Her heart pounded so fast it felt like the whole car shook with it, and she whispered under her breath, half prayer and half plea, "Please don't die, please wait, I'll get you there." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself not to cry, knowing tears would only blur the road more. The man shifted again, his head tilting toward her, and in the brief reflection of the streetlights she caught the outline of his face. He looked strong even in weakness, his features sharp and commanding, and something about his presence both terrified and comforted her. She didn't know his name, didn't know why fate had thrown him into her path, but she understood with absolute clarity that his life was now tied to hers. If she failed, he would be gone. That thought gave her strength she didn't know she had. A red light loomed ahead, cars lined up across the intersection, but Lily didn't dare stop. She pressed down harder on the pedal, the engine roaring louder than she thought possible, and the car shot forward into the gap. Drivers braked, horns screamed, a cab swerved at the last second to avoid colliding with her, but somehow she made it through. Her tiny body trembled with adrenaline, but she managed to steady the wheel again. Each near miss only deepened her determination, and the glow of the hospital sign seemed brighter now, closer, like a promise waiting to be kept. The road narrowed as she turned onto the main street leading directly to the emergency entrance. The car jolted over a pothole, the shock throwing her against the seatbelt, but she gritted her teeth and held on. Her arms ached from gripping the steering wheel so tightly, her legs shook from straining to reach the pedals, but she refused to stop. Every ounce of her strength was poured into the simple act of keeping the car moving forward, step by step, yard by yard, until she could almost see the entrance doors gleaming under fluorescent light. For the first time since climbing behind the wheel, she allowed herself a breath that wasn't choked with fear. She could almost taste the relief, almost imagine handing him over to people who would know how to save him. She turned to glance at him, desperate for reassurance, and noticed the faintest flicker of movement in his eyelids. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it gave her the courage she needed for the final stretch. The hospital was close now, and she promised herself silently, with all the fierce determination a 7-year-old could hold, that she would not fail him, not now, not when she had already come this far. The hospital lights came into full view as Lily turned the wheel, her hand slipping slightly against the leather from how tightly she had been holding on. The entrance to the emergency ward was just ahead, glowing under harsh fluorescent lamps that spilled across the pavement, and for the first time since she had taken control of the car, she felt the faint flicker of hope that she might actually succeed. Yet the final stretch was not without danger. The car jerked as her foot pressed unevenly against the pedal, pulling them too close to the curb before she managed to wrestle it back into the center of the lane. The sound of tires screeching echoed in her ears, but she kept going, refusing to let fear paralyze her now. The road leading into the hospital was crowded with late-night taxis, flashing ambulances, and cars dropping off patients. Drivers leaned on their horns when she swerved in too abruptly, but Lily barely noticed. Her gaze was locked on the sliding glass doors where people in scrubs rushed in and out with clipboards and stretchers. That was where she needed to be. She whispered to herself, steady and urgent, almost there, just a little more. Her knuckles turned white as she steered the heavy car into the driveway, her legs straining to keep the brake and gas balanced, her small body trembling with the effort. Inside the car, the man in the blue suit groaned again, his head rolling slightly toward the window. Lily's heart clenched at the sound. It meant he was still alive, still fighting, but it also reminded her that time was running out. She thought about how terrifying it must feel to be trapped in his body, unable to move, dependent on a stranger, and she pressed her foot harder to close the distance between them and the doctors who could help. The hospital sign loomed overhead, and she aimed the car straight at the emergency entrance, determined not to stop until she reached it. The final turn was sharper than she expected.